The radar screen blinks. 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. A single red dot appears over the Baltic Sea. It shouldn't be there. In the operations room beneath Ramstein Air Base, a junior officer leans forward, squinting at the anomaly. His hand hovers over the alert button. For 7 seconds he hesitates. 7 seconds that will define the century. Then the dot multiplies. 2 becomes 4. 4 becomes 16. The night duty commander reaches for the red phone. The call goes through encrypted channels to Brussels, to Washington, to London. Within 90 seconds, the word travels through military networks like electricity through copper wire. Scramble. Launch. Respond. The old world doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a series of calculated decisions made by exhausted men in underground rooms. And in that instant, as missiles arc toward their targets and populations sleep in ignorance, a new question rises above all others. When the map redraws itself in fire, where will the safe ground be? The answer isn't found in military strength or economic power. It lives in the margins of geography, in the quiet corners where great powers have no reason to look. Because in the mathematics of total war, survival belongs not to the mighty, but to the irrelevant, to the distant, to the prepared. This is the story of the nations that will endure, not because they fight, but because they don't have to. The first missile launches at 4:12 a.m. A Sarmat ICBM lifts from its silo in the Ural Mountains, its engines burning white-hot against the pre-dawn darkness. Satellite networks detect the infrared signature immediately. The data streams to command centers across 3 continents. Confirmation protocols activate. Retaliation doctrines engage. By 4:19 a.m., 16 NATO bases are on full alert. By 4:23, American Minuteman missiles are receiving targeting coordinates. The cascade has begun. But here's what most people don't understand about nuclear war. The weapons themselves are only the opening move. The real devastation comes from what they destroy: power grids, communication networks, supply chains, the invisible architecture that keeps 8 billion people alive. When the first warheads detonate over military installations in Poland and the Baltic states, they don't just kill soldiers. They generate electromagnetic pulses that fry electronics for hundreds of kilometers. Transformers explode. Data centers go dark. The internet doesn't slow down. It simply stops existing in entire regions. In London, the lights flicker once, then die. In Berlin, traffic signals freeze. In Paris, the metro trains coast to silent stops in pitch-black tunnels. The passengers wait for announcements that will never come, because the people who would make those announcements are staring at dead screens, trying to understand what just happened. This is the information gap, the void between what governments know and what citizens can comprehend. In capital cities across Europe and North America, emergency protocols activate in classified bunkers. But above ground, in apartments and houses and office buildings, people check their phones and find nothing. No signal, no data, no explanation. Just the eerie silence of a connected world suddenly cut off from itself. The confusion lasts approximately 40 minutes. Then the second wave hits. Not missiles this time, but information. Pirate radio broadcasts, shortwave transmissions, emergency alert systems that still function in some regions. The messages are fragmented, contradictory, terrifying. Nuclear exchange confirmed. Major cities targeted. Seek shelter immediately. But shelter where? Most urban populations have no fallout protection. No basements rated for radiation. No supplies beyond what sits in their kitchens. The average household in a western city contains food for approximately 3 days, maybe 4 if rationed carefully. Water for less than that. Medication for chronic conditions runs out within weeks. Insulin, blood pressure pills, antidepressants. The pharmaceutical supply chain is a just-in-time system that depends on trucks, planes, and global coordination. When those systems fail, people don't just lose comfort. They lose the chemistry that keeps them alive. By hour 6, the supermarkets are war zones. Not because supplies are gone, because fear is contagious. Someone breaks a window, someone else follows. The security systems are offline. The police are overwhelmed or gone. The social contract, that invisible agreement that keeps strangers civil, dissolves under pressure. People who would never steal suddenly find themselves fighting over bottled water and canned goods. The violence isn't ideological, it's primal. Survival instinct stripped of its civilized veneer. In wealthy neighborhoods, people lock their doors and pray their supplies last. In poor neighborhoods, people organize or scatter. The invisible lines of class and resource access become visible borders defended with whatever weapons are available. Baseball bats, kitchen knives, the hunting rifles that seemed paranoid last week. And through it all, the radiation spreads, invisible, odorless, carried on wind currents that respect no borders. The fallout from ground-burst detonations lifts into the atmosphere and drifts according to jet stream patterns. Eastern Europe receives the heaviest concentrations, but within days detectable levels reach Scandinavia, the Mediterranean, the Middle East. Geiger counters, those rare devices owned by preppers and dismissed by everyone else, suddenly become more valuable than gold, because they tell the only truth that matters. Whether the air itself is poison? Now, zoom out. Pull back from the chaos and see the global map as strategists see it, as a puzzle of targets and safe zones, as a calculation of what matters and what doesn't. The nations caught in the direct line of fire, the NATO members, the Russian Federation, China, and their immediate neighbors, these are the primary theaters. Europe east of France, the Korean Peninsula, the South China Sea, the Middle East where oil and old hatreds intersect. These regions experience immediate devastation. But here's the paradox of modern warfare. In an age of intercontinental missiles and global alliances, distance still matters. Strategic insignificance still protects. The countries most likely to survive are not those with the strongest defenses. They are those with no reason to be targeted in the first place. New Zealand sits in the South Pacific, more than 2,000 kilometers from Australia, nearly 12,000 from California. It has no nuclear weapons, no major military bases hosting foreign powers, no resources critical enough to justify a first strike. Its agricultural sector produces far more food than its 5 million people need. Its renewable energy infrastructure, hydroelectric dams, and geothermal plants operates independently of global fuel markets. When the Northern Hemisphere descends into chaos, New Zealand's greatest challenge isn't survival. It's deciding what to do about the refugee ships that will inevitably appear on its shores. Ships carrying the desperate, the wealthy, the connected. People who suddenly realize that all their power and money mean nothing when the world burns. The New Zealand government faces an impossible choice: open the borders and risk overwhelming their systems, or close them and watch people die at sea. There is no moral answer, only the answer that keeps their own population alive. Switzerland represents a different kind of safety: geographic centrality surrounded by protective neutrality. For centuries, the Swiss have perfected the art of armed non-alignment. They maintain a substantial military, mandatory civil defense training, and shelter space for virtually every citizen. Their tunnels and bunkers, built during the Cold War and maintained ever since, can house the entire population for months. When war breaks out, Switzerland closes its borders immediately, not with apologies or explanations, simply with the cold efficiency of a nation that has survived every European conflict for 500 years by staying out of them. The Swiss franc, backed by gold reserves and global banking secrecy, becomes one of the few currencies that retains value when digital transaction systems collapse. Swiss shelters fill quickly. Families descend into underground facilities stocked with food, water, medical supplies, and air filtration systems. Above ground, the military deploys to mountain passes and border crossings, not to invade, to ensure no one invades them. Iceland, perched in the North Atlantic, offers a different paradigm. It has no standing army. Its NATO membership is largely symbolic, a diplomatic gesture with no real military infrastructure. Its 350,000 people live on a volcanic island, warmed by geothermal energy and protected by 1,000 kilometers of ocean. When the missiles fly, Iceland's greatest vulnerability is fallout carried by North Atlantic wind currents. But its geothermal heating systems continue running. Its greenhouses continue producing food. Its fishing fleets, if they choose to risk the waters, can still harvest protein. The Icelandic government activates civil defense protocols developed during the Cold War. Iodine tablets distributed. Radiation monitoring stations activated. Borders effectively closed by the simple fact that air travel ceases and no ships approach. Isolation becomes Iceland's fortress. Chile stretches along South America's western edge, caught between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. It has no enemies with intercontinental reach, no strategic resources that justify nuclear targeting. Its agricultural valleys produce wine, fruit, and grain. Its northern deserts hold copper and lithium, valuable in peacetime but irrelevant when global trade collapses. When war breaks out in the northern hemisphere, Chile watches from the other side of the equator. Its government maintains order. Its military patrols borders to prevent refugee influx from neighboring countries experiencing instability. Its people, accustomed to earthquakes and natural disasters, adapt to the new abnormal with resilience born from geography. The Andes form a natural barrier to the east. The Pacific offers escape to the west. Chile becomes a waiting room, a place where life continues in diminished form while the world decides whether it will end or rebuild. Australia faces a more complex calculation. It has vast land, abundant resources, and strong ties to Western alliances. Its military hosts American surveillance stations and naval facilities. These factors make it a potential target. But Australia's size works in its favor. A nuclear strike on Sydney or Melbourne would be devastating. But the outback, that enormous interior desert, remains untouched. Australia's challenge isn't surviving the initial exchange. It's navigating the political aftermath. Does it maintain alliance commitments and risk further strikes? Or does it declare neutrality and sever ties with the powers that dragged it into conflict? The Australian government, operating from secure facilities in Canberra, makes the hardest choice a democracy can make. It prioritizes its own survival over alliance obligations. It recalls its forces. It closes its ports to foreign military vessels. It becomes a fortress continent, self-sufficient and isolated. The decision fractures political parties and divides the population. But it keeps the lights on. Across these nations, a pattern emerges. The countries that survive are those that prepared before the crisis, not during it. They are the ones with food reserves, energy independence, and social cohesion strong enough to prevent collapse into chaos. They are the nations whose people trust their governments enough to follow orders even when information is scarce. Because in the aftermath of global war, trust becomes a strategic resource as vital as food or fuel. Without it, even the safest geography turns into a killing ground. By day 3, the global situation stabilizes into a horrific new normal. The initial nuclear exchanges have ended, not because of peace negotiations, but because both sides have exhausted their primary target lists. The missiles that remain are held in reserve. Deterrence still operates, even in the ruins. But the damage is done. 60 major cities are gone. 300 million people are dead or dying. Infrastructure across the northern hemisphere is shattered, and the fallout continues its invisible journey through the atmosphere, raining down on populations that have no idea whether today's air will kill them in a week or a decade. The internet is gone, not everywhere, but in enough places that global communication becomes impossible. Satellite networks are damaged or destroyed by anti-satellite weapons deployed in the war's opening hours. The cloud, that abstract concept where everyone stored their data, turns out to be very physical servers in very specific locations, most of them in blast zones. In the safe nations, life continues in altered form. New Zealand rations fuel and imports nothing. Its farms operate. Its power flows. But luxuries disappear overnight. Coffee, electronics, anything manufactured overseas. The government implements a war economy without being at war. Rationing systems, labor conscription, strict border controls. The population accepts these measures because the alternative, visible through news reports from the few remaining international channels, is unthinkable. Switzerland emerges from its bunkers after 2 weeks when radiation levels drop to survivable thresholds. The Swiss economy contracts but doesn't collapse. The banks continue operating, now serving the handful of nations still functioning. Swiss neutrality, once dismissed as historical curiosity, becomes the model every surviving nation wishes it had followed. Iceland faces food security challenges as global fishing waters become uncertain and fallout contaminates North Atlantic regions. But its greenhouses, powered by geothermal energy, expand rapidly. The government converts every available underground space into hydroponic farms. The population, small enough to coordinate effectively, adapts with surprising speed. Chile and Argentina, the southern cone of South America, become the default food exporters for whatever international trade still exists. Their harvests, untouched by radiation and distant from conflict zones, suddenly feed the remnant global economy. They trade grain and beef for medicine and technology from the few functioning industrial centers. They become rich in the currency that matters most, calories. Australia's decision to break from its alliances saves its cities, but costs its international reputation. The American government, operating from secure facilities in Colorado, views the Australian withdrawal as betrayal. But America is in no position to enforce consequences. Its military is consumed with maintaining domestic order. Its economy has collapsed into regional fragments. Its political system is hanging by threads of emergency authority. Australia survives. America endures. There's a difference. The nations that don't make this list, the ones caught in the fire, experience a different reality. Europe east of France is largely uninhabitable. Radiation levels in Poland, Germany, and the Baltic states will remain dangerous for decades. The survivors migrate west and south, creating the largest refugee crisis in human history. 50 million people on the move with nowhere safe to go. The Middle East, already fractured by decades of proxy wars and sectarian conflict, descends into complete chaos. When central governments collapse, tribal and religious factions fill the void. The oil that once powered global economies burns in uncontrolled fires or sits inaccessible under contaminated ground. East Asia, the manufacturing heart of the old world, is shattered. China's coastal cities, where 800 million people lived in a space the size of France, are gone. The interior provinces survive but fragment into regional authorities. Japan and South Korea, caught between nuclear powers, suffer catastrophic losses. Their dense populations and limited geography offer no escape. The safe nations watch this unfold through the limited information channels that remain. They see the images, the refugee columns, the makeshift camps, the disease outbreaks, and they make the calculation that will define the next century. They close their borders, not with regret, with cold necessity, because accepting refugees means overwhelming their systems. It means sharing limited resources until everyone starves together. It means importing the chaos they've managed to avoid. The moral weight of this decision will haunt generations. But the alternative is extinction, so the borders stay closed. The ships are turned away. The planes are denied landing rights. The safe nations become islands not just geographically, but morally, fortresses of stability in an ocean of suffering. This is the truth that no one wants to speak aloud. Survival in global war isn't about military strength or technological advantage. It's about being strategically irrelevant. It's about living far enough from power centers that you don't register as a target. It's about having the resources to stand alone when global systems fail. And it's about making brutal choices that prioritize your own population over abstract humanitarian principles. The countries that survive World War III are not the heroes of the story. They are the ones who were never important enough to destroy. By month 2, the survivors understand they're not waiting for things to return to normal. Normal is gone. The global economy that connected every nation in a web of trade and finance has collapsed into isolated regional markets. The international institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, NATO, exist only as memories and empty buildings. The nuclear powers, exhausted and devastated, maintain their arsenals but no longer threaten each other. Mutual destruction has been achieved. Further strikes serve no purpose. The war doesn't end with treaties or surrender. It ends with silence, with exhaustion, with the recognition that everyone has lost. In the safe nations, a new society takes shape. New Zealand develops a rigidly controlled economy focused entirely on self-sufficiency. Its democracy survives but transforms into something harder, more pragmatic. Individual rights are subordinated to collective survival. The population accepts this because they see the alternative playing out across the rest of the world. Switzerland maintains its pre-war institutions but operates in near total isolation. The Swiss become the keepers of the old world's wealth, the bankers for whoever remains. Iceland transforms into a research station, using its geothermal resources to develop technologies for radiation cleanup and food production in contaminated environments. Chile and Argentina form a southern alliance, the breadbasket for whatever international community eventually re-emerges. Australia fortifies, its military expands. Its coastline becomes a wall. It prepares for the next crisis with the grim understanding that safety is temporary and peace is an illusion. The children born in these nations will grow up in a world their grandparents wouldn't recognize. A world where international travel is rare and dangerous, where electronic devices are precious and irreplaceable, where the old stories about global civilization sound like fairy tales. They will learn to farm and build and repair with their hands because supply chains no longer exist.